My name is Edna. I'm standing outside the very building I helped transform over the past 4 years, swiping my now useless access badge against the cold glass. The red light flashes mockingly with each attempt, a harsh reminder of what has just happened. I've been fired by the man I loved, Max. It all started so differently. I met Max in the tech sector. He was a whiz in sales strategy, while I managed operations. Our personalities were as different as night and day, but we seemed to fit together like puzzle pieces. We built a life that, from the outside, looked unbreakable. We had shared routines, faced shared stress, and made plans that stretched far into the future. Max's father, Henry Blackwood, was a titan in the manufacturing industry. He had built a medium-sized company from the ground up over 35 years. It employed 250 people and had a rock-solid reputation. Henry was a shrewd, persistent man. 5 years into my relationship with Max, Henry approached me with an offer I was hesitant to accept. He wanted me to become the chief operating officer of his company. I was comfortable in the tech world, with a stable and well-paying job. But Henry was insistent. He said the company needed modernization, better systems, and someone with a deep understanding of scale and process. Max also encouraged me, saying it would be good for our future. So, I took the plunge. The pay cut was significant, but Henry promised me equity and profit sharing. It wasn't in writing, just his word, but he spoke with such conviction that I believed him. For the next 4 years, I worked harder than I ever had. I overhauled workflows, cut down on waste, and improved profit margins. The company grew by almost 45%. Henry and I developed a strong partnership. We spent long evenings discussing strategy, planning for succession, and debating growth. Max worked at the company too, in senior sales. We kept our professional and personal lives separate, and it worked well. Until it didn't. 3 weeks ago, Henry died suddenly at his desk. It was a massive heart attack. He was only 64 and in good health. One moment he was there, and the next, he was gone. The funeral was a large affair, and I gave the eulogy. Max barely said a word. A week later, the will was read. As expected, the company went to Max as his only child. I naively assumed we would continue working together. But 2 days after the will reading, Max called me into his father's, now his office. He sat behind the large oak desk as if he had always owned it. "We need to talk about your role here," he said. That was the moment my world started to crumble. By Friday morning, my access badge stopped working. I stood outside, my breath fogging in the cold air, while the security guard, Tom, whom I had hired 2 years ago, avoided my eyes. He cleared his throat and said, "Miss Edna, I'm sorry. Your credentials were deactivated this morning." The words hit me like a sledgehammer. I tried swiping my badge again and again, as if my persistence could change Max's decision. I called Max, and he answered on the first ring. "Why doesn't my badge work?" I asked, my voice surprisingly steady. "I told you we needed to make changes," he replied, without a hint of softness or guilt. I argued that he had locked me out without a proper conversation, but he insisted we had already talked. He then informed me that he had reassigned my projects and that my direct reports would now answer to an interim VP of operations. I asked about the equity and profit sharing his father had promised. He coldly said it was just a verbal agreement and not in my contract. He offered me 2 weeks severance for years of hard work, and it was reduced to a corporate shrug. I asked if it was about us, but he said it was just business. Then he dropped the bombshell, "You were my father's choice, Edna, not mine. And I'm done living in the shadow of what he wanted." And with that, he hung up. That weekend was a blur of dread. Max didn't come home. He sent a text late on Friday saying he was staying at his mom's and needed space. I spent the next 2 days wandering around our apartment like a ghost, touching the things we shared. I couldn't understand how someone could be so devastated by their father's death and still have the energy to destroy me. On Monday, I called an employment lawyer, Mr. Thompson, who specialized in executive disputes. He listened patiently as I laid out the whole story. When I finished, he sighed and said that at-will employment meant Max could fire me for almost any reason. Verbal agreements about equity were hard to enforce without proof. But I told him I had some meeting notes and a few emails from Henry referencing my stake and profit sharing. He admitted it could help, but also warned me that the legal process would be expensive and the outcome was not guaranteed. As I sat at my kitchen counter, our dog nuzzling my knee, I asked, what if there's more to it? What if he's making decisions that put the company at risk? Mr. Thompson asked me to give an example. And then, the memory hit me. 6 weeks ago, during a routine financial review, I noticed a pattern in Max's sales reporting. Deals were being listed as closed when they were still pending, and revenue was being booked before it had actually cleared. His forecasts were tightened in a way that made his performance look outstanding when the real numbers were average. I had flagged this to Henry. He had gone quiet, his eyes narrowing as he smelled trouble. He told me to prepare a full analysis and send it to the board before the quarterly review. I did just that, compiling all the relevant information and sending preliminary reports to the external board members. But then Henry died, and in the chaos, I pushed that problem to the back of my mind. Meanwhile, Max had used it as an opportunity to get rid of me. I realized that I had already given evidence to the board 3 weeks ago, before Henry's death and before Max fired me. Mr. Thompson's tone changed when I told him this. He said that if Max was misrepresenting performance, it was a potential breach of fiduciary duty, and the board had an obligation to investigate. He also said that if the board meeting, which I had called before Henry's death, was still happening, I should attend as a stakeholder with important information. I asked who the board chairman was. It was a retired industry executive named Walter Reed. Mr. Thompson advised me to call him that night. I waited until after dinner, not because of the timing, but because I needed to steady my voice. When Walter answered, he sounded calm and professional. He said he had been expecting my call and that he had reviewed the reports I sent and had significant concerns. I told him that Max had fired me on Friday morning and deactivated my badge. He said he had heard rumors, which only increased his concerns. He confirmed that the meeting was still on and invited me as his guest, saying my expertise was needed. On Friday morning, I put on my best suit, not to look powerful, but to remind myself that I still was. When I arrived at the office, Tom's eyes widened in surprise. I held my head high and said I was there for the board meeting. He made a call, listened, and then stepped aside. Inside, the hallway smelled the same as always, but I felt like a stranger in my own life. Max's assistant hissed at me, saying I couldn't be there. I calmly replied that I was invited and opened the conference room door. The 3 external board members were already seated. Walter was at the far end, beside him was Dr. Amelia Green, a business professor, and Mr. Lewis Clark, a corporate governance attorney. And there, at the head of the table, sat Max. His face went white when he saw me. "What are you doing here?" he snapped. Walter ignored him and said, "She's here at my invitation. Please sit down, Miss Edna. We have a lot to discuss." As I sat down, Max's eyes locked on mine, filled with anger and confusion. In that moment, I realized he hadn't fired me because he stopped loving me. He fired me because he thought I was the only one who could expose his lies. The meeting was calm but intense. Walter calmly asked Max to explain the inconsistencies in the Q3 and Q4 sales figures that I had flagged 3 weeks ago. Max dismissed it as me being a disgruntled former employee with a personal vendetta. But Walter pointed out that the reports were submitted before Henry's death and my termination, so we should focus on the numbers. Dr. Green projected several documents onto the screen, showing that at least 30% of the reported closed deals were still in negotiation when the revenue was booked. Max shrugged it off, saying it was normal sales practice. But Mr. Clark cut in, saying it was misrepresentation. I spoke up, saying that 3 days before Henry's death, we had discussed these exact numbers, and he was concerned and had approved an investigation. I showed the email chain on my laptop. Max slammed his hand on the table and accused me of lying. Walter warned him against accusing me of falsifying evidence, as the emails were timestamped and archived. After a tense silence, Walter announced that they were bringing in an external audit firm to review the sales reporting for the past 3 years. Until the process was complete, Max was restricted from making major operational decisions without board approval. Max stood up, shouting that he owned the company. Mr. Clark corrected him, saying he owned the shares, but the company had fiduciary obligations, and the board had full oversight authority according to the bylaws Henry had drafted. Max hissed at me, saying I was trying to destroy him. I looked him in the eye and said, "I'm trying to protect the company your father built, the same company you've been lying about." Walter then adjourned the meeting. Max stormed out, and I stayed. The audit took 3 long weeks. Max avoided me completely during this time. When the findings came back, they were even worse than I had expected. Max had consistently inflated the numbers quarter after quarter, just enough to look exceptional but small enough to avoid scrutiny. He had done it for bonuses, better performance optics, and to position himself as the obvious heir. The board gave Max a choice: resign as CEO with a severance package or be terminated for cause. He chose to resign. 2 days later, Walter called me and asked me to return as interim CEO for 6 months while they conducted an external search. I agreed, not for the power, but for closure. Max moved out while I was at work. He left a note saying, "I hope you're happy." I wasn't happy, but I was calm and grounded. We're now in the middle of a legal separation. His lawyer claims I manipulated his father and stole the company from him, but the audit findings tell a different story. The company is doing well. Without the inflated numbers, we now have a clear picture of what needs to be fixed. The employees were shaken at first, but they rallied because they knew who had always been there for them. I'll leave when my 6-month term is up. The board is finalizing a new CEO, someone from outside the family. As for me, I'll move on, maybe back to the tech world or somewhere quieter. The hardest lesson I've learned isn't about business. It's about grief. Grief doesn't just break people, sometimes it reveals who they really are. I like to think Henry would be proud of how the safeguards he built into the company worked, even if it cost him his son and me our future together.